Good evening, everyone. My name is Charmaine Williams, and I am pleased to welcome you all to our second annual Janice Rotman Distinguished Lecture on Mental Wellness. I would usually start off the evening with a land acknowledgement, recognizing the enduring presence of the Indigenous people who have lived in these territories. Tonight, instead, I'm going to use this time to act on what I have learned from the wise women who have generously taught me about Indigenous ways of knowing and being. I know those women would tell me that if there are people who are hurting in the room, you attend to those people and you honor that pain by letting them know it is seen and felt. So I know there are people who are here with us tonight who are carrying burdens of pain, feelings of anguish, anger, other feelings that are hard to even put into words. I want you to know that you are seen, and I hope that this evening is in some way what you need at this time. It is fitting that this evening we are gathering to increase our knowledge and awareness of intergenerational trauma by gaining insight into how it has affected survivors of the Holocaust and their families. As this evening's speaker, Dr. Paula David, wrote in preparation for this event, Holocaust survivors, in sharing their personal testimonies, have left us a legacy of insight and understanding that can help inform approaches to mental health practice, not only for the Jewish community, but all communities who experience racialized, ethnic, and religious oppression. At the same time, the traumatic ramifications of the Holocaust and ongoing anti-Semitism, felt so palpably in this moment, point to a critical need for social workers and other mental health professionals to better respond to the diverse needs and lived experiences of Jewish people and communities. As part of our ongoing commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion in our programs, the Factor Inwentash Faculty of Social Work is working to strengthen our education, outreach, and research on this front. This evening's lecture is part of that work. The annual Janice Rotman Distinguished Lecture Series on mental wellness was inspired by Janice Rotman, a generous and ardent supporter of our faculty, whose philanthropic vision helped us establish the faculty's Talk It Out Clinic. The clinic launched during the height of the pandemic to serve Black and lower income communities hardest hit by COVID-19. Since then, it has gone on to help meet the unique needs of older populations and to benefit young adults living with chronic illness. Janice's commitment to these issues is inspirational to both us and to our broader community. Regretfully, Janice Rotman was not able to join us this evening, but she asked me to share a few words she prepared for the event. From Janice. I appreciate everyone joining together tonight to participate in this important conversation. In light of current events, I think that discussions such as this are extremely important. My emotions are so mixed. I am sad, angry, confused, reflective, hopeful, scared. I hope that tonight, with Dr. David, we can process some of these feelings that many of us are sharing. Like Janice, I hope our time together tonight helps us make sense of what is happening around us and what is happening to us. Before we hear from our distinguished speaker, I am pleased to extend a welcome to a special guest, Dr. Anna Sternis, Director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, and the Al and Malka Green Professor in Yiddish Studies, and a fellow at the John Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. Thank you, Dr. Sternis, for joining us and for agreeing to offer remarks to start our Q&A following Dr. David's presentation. Here's how our evening will unfold. Dr. Paula David will give a 1-hour lecture, and the lecture will be followed by brief remarks from Dr. Sternis, who I see has come on screen. Following those remarks, We have set aside time for a Q&A period. At that point, we will welcome Professor Lin Feng to initiate and moderate the Q&A. Dr. Feng is the Factor Inventosh Chair in Children's Mental Health and the founding director of the Talk It Out online counseling clinic. Audience members are invited to submit questions to Dr. David about her presentation using the Q&A button you will find at the bottom of the screen. As is often the case, we may not have time to get to everyone's questions. However, I thank everyone in advance for their thoughtful engagement with this evening's presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Paula David. Those of you who are part of the Factor Inventosh community are likely familiar with Dr. Paula David and her work, and I am so pleased that we are welcoming her back to us as a distinguished speaker. A graduate of Factor Inventosh's MSW and PhD programs, Paula has been active in the social work profession for almost 5 decades. She has enjoyed a long career working with aging Holocaust survivors, their families, and survivors of subsequent genocides. Based on both her fieldwork and research, she now shares her experience and unique trauma-informed approaches with students of all ages, teachers, health professionals, isolated families, various trauma and genocide survivors, First Nations families and communities, and the people who care for them. Paula is a frequent guest lecturer, consultant, and curriculum developer on the topic of caring for aging Holocaust survivors and those who have survived subsequent wars, genocide, and extreme trauma. Most recently, she has been involved in cross-cultural, post-memory creative initiatives that integrate her rich experience in the areas of mental health and trauma. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paula David.
Thank you, Dean Williams, for the kind words. For me, it is both an honor and a challenge to gather together this evening. Even while moving to a virtual gathering, I still feel the presence of a community sharing similar interests. Based on my talk's title this evening, those interests are diverse, far-reaching, and complex. And since I began preparing, they have become more complex and constantly changing. In the past 2 weeks, my world has turned upside down, and we have all found ourselves thrown onto varying emotional roller coasters. War, terror, and incredible loss, now in the Middle East, has given new and heartbreaking relevance to tonight's topic. I recognize and appreciate that all of you have made the effort to join in and be part of this difficult discourse. I also want to acknowledge the faculty, my colleagues, my students, and most of all, my clients and their families, who have all taught me so much over the years. Those lessons have taken on new meaning in the past few weeks, and hopefully they may illuminate some reactions to these difficult days. A special thanks to Janice Rotman for supporting this series and recognizing the integral role that mental wellness plays in all aspects of a just society. I worked with her father for my Baycrest days and applaud her family's commitment to health and wellness. When preparing this lecture, as the Middle East crises evolved day by day, I was caught up in the compounded complexity of the range of issues being addressed. This lecture was never intended to be an analysis of the social or political evolution of events in Israel-Palestine, nor a response to the human suffering. In order to see as much clarity as possible, I have decided to prepare a written lecture and will be reading my notes. Bear with me, but these are topics that reflect my consuming concerns and passions, both personally and professionally, and I want to do them justice. As I proceed through the slides, you will notice several photos used to illustrate my points. Over the years, while creating and sharing slide presentations, I have used my photo library to serve as my personal tribute to the various Holocaust survivors and other people who have impacted my work and my world. Some photos carry a story, which I will share. Some are silent tributes, Summer salutes to my ever-supportive family, and sharing the images in this way has become part of my respect and remembering. Finally, I want to acknowledge all of the Holocaust survivors and their families I have met over the years, who have had the strength to share their memories and stories with me and help me to better understand the multiple meanings of trauma and resilience. Slide, please. We changed it now. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that I will be touching on, I'm sorry, can we have the next slide? I also want to acknowledge that I will be touching on several sensitive and sometimes uncomfortable topics. I am a firm believer that without tackling these conversations and going down these challenging roads of exploration and discussion, we will never be able to resolve and improve the societal, political, and the quality of life inequity that inform tonight's subject matter. Part of my commitment to my learning and my work has always been to tackle those topics with one end goal in mind. Conversations, informed debate, self-awareness, and careful listening when addressing these issues will bring us closer to moving beyond so many of the existing barriers. Much of this list of topics will be embedded in my discussion, all from a perspective of our intuitive need to survive and move forward. To underline this discussion, the photo here is a collage of several people who identify as Jewish, and therefore represents the diversity within that identity. Next slide, please. I've chosen to start with likely the most challenging of all of these issues and talk about genocide so that we can all move forward with a common understanding of what that actually means. This slide was taken from a booklet by the Native Women's Association of Canada. In an excellent graphic novel written by sisters Cholula and Fanny LaFontaine in 2021, it is a clear and very simple book to read, even while they have met the challenge of taking very complex, difficult topics and making them accessible to a wide audience. Basically, the key takeaway of this definition is that genocide is defined by the intentional commitment of any one of 5 prohibitive acts and to commit those with the intent to destroy a given group. Appropriately or not, sadly, post-Holocaust, the word has become one of common usage in the English language. Next slide, please. This slide is just a reminder that the Holocaust was not the first genocide in the 20th century. The list brings us to the present, where the war in Ukraine, which started out as an invasion, is now, according to the definition, defined as a genocide. Sadly, we must also look within our own country. Indigenous communities across Canada that have existed here for centuries have experienced various genocides at worst and chronic oppression at best. Obviously, the list demonstrates that the war to end all wars and the notion of never again is a sad testament to the reality that the word genocide still remains in our everyday language. However, the word is still primarily associated with the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism remains a global and present-day threat. When bringing this list up to date, I made a conscious decision not to add Israel-Palestine to this list, as we are in the middle of a crisis and not in a position to discuss the scope of outcomes and impacts at this point in time. Thank you. Next slide, please. This definition of anti-Semitism is here so that moving forward, we are all working with a common understanding of my use of the word. Today's realities demonstrate that the issue of anti-Semitism remains ever present in so many aspects of local and global events. In the past few weeks, it has taken on new meaning, created new discourse, and caused me to personally rethink how and what I would say tonight. My thoughts are tumbling around in my head, even as the world is now including this word in everyday casual conversation. In the past few weeks, it has insinuated itself into this and taken on new meaning and deep-seated fear for many. There is a long history of global anti-Semitism going back to pre-biblical times, which I'm not going to touch on tonight, but suffice it to say, it remains embedded in modern society and is influencing all the disturbing current events. This includes the global context, official news media, social media, and right here in our own backyard. In spite of this definition, several countries have increased their tolerance of blatant anti-Semitism, moving towards clear discriminatory policies without apology. History has, time and time again, that the level of tolerance for anti-Semitism within a given country, religion, or culture has a direct correlation and acts as a barometer for the level of tolerance for systemic racism in other marginalized groups. Canada has its own history of anti-Semitism. Next slide, please. Historically, there are so many constructs, myths, and misconceptions about Jews that over time, anti-Semitism has become a catch-all word that represents a collective ignorance and cognitive dysfunction that is overwhelming. Generally speaking, as Canadians, we have a quiet tradition of pride in our inclusivity and multicultural identity. Realistically, it doesn't work that well. This photo is the cover of B'nai B'rith of Canada's 2023 edition of their book, Canada's Annual Audit of Anti-Semitic Incidents. Every graphic shown here on this cover represents actual samples of anti-Semitic incidents that occurred in Canada only last year. The self-identified Jewish population in Canada includes Jews who are religiously observant, those who are secular, those who land anywhere between the two, those who are people of various colors, gender identities, and countries of origin, those who speak different languages, and those who say they are assimilated Jews. Sadly, anti-Semitism remains the common phenomena of this very diverse group. History has also taught us that the existence and tolerance for anti-Semitism can be further relied on as a barometer of many other isms that we are coping with today. Next slide, please. Still, I personally have always been thankful and aware of my identity as Canadian. More recently, I have become aware about what my Canadian privilege has imposed on the Indigenous nations of our land. In the 16th century, the first group of foreigners arrived with the intent to colonize and impose their culture on the people living here. Many of their values and assumptions became embedded in the new culture. Eventually, as Canada evolved over the centuries, so did notions of supremacy and exclusivity. There have also been periods in Canadian history where we welcomed immigrants and refugees to become part of a proud, multicultural, and inclusive society. There are also those dark chapters where we haven't. And even today, we continue to struggle with the challenges of inclusivity, our notions of equity and mutual respect, and what it means to live in a diverse society. We continue to debate and delay our commitment on how to embrace truth and reconciliation fully. Growing up Canadian, I was always so proud to be part of a cultural mosaic, which to me felt very different from our American neighbors' pride in their melting pot. I felt a mosaic implied individual pieces contributing to making a whole new and enhanced outcome, while melting pot symbolized losing individuals and their unique differences and disappearing into a common sameness. As I learned more of our history, I realized the great potential of the mosaic often contained broken promises. There is a thread of anti-Semitism woven into the historic tapestry of this country that also runs in and out of the years, continuing to damage the fabric that wraps us all in our understanding of what is Canadian. The words, "none is too many," uttered by a Canadian civil servant post-Holocaust and referring to Jewish survivors seeking safe haven, seems to lie just below the surface today in how we welcome different groups of refugee claimants in the present. This slide shows a picture of passengers on the St. Louis in 1939. This ship carried over 900 Jews from across Europe and was heading to North America seeking protection from the Nazi occupation. Cuba turned them away. Several ports in the US turned them away. And finally, we in Canada turned them away. The photo shows the boat back in Europe, docking in Belgium. After vociferous public debate, eventually Great Britain, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands each admitted a percentage of the passengers upon their return. Even then, 254 passengers subsequently perished in the Holocaust. Canada remained silent post-war when the atrocities that occurred became public knowledge, and Canada reluctantly and slowly allowed some survivors entry, but only with very strict quotas and conditions of support directly from the Canadian Jewish community. Next slide, please. This slide is from a book published by the City of Toronto in 2022 and can be found online with further discussion. Toronto is my city. I was born in what was known then as Toronto the Good, and I grew up in a suburban middle-class community, always believing that was so. As part of a Jewish family in a predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant new suburb of Don Mills, I was definitely a minority. Even though I was usually the only Jewish child in my class, I always assumed that I was part of a strong, integrated, open mind, and equitable community, even though I knew I didn't really belong. My grandparents on both sides were proud immigrants who arrived in Toronto at the turn of the century and happy to be in Canada. They struggled to earn a living, learn the language and customs of their new home, and were totally grateful that they had the opportunity to do so. On both sides of my family, this generation arrived as young adults who left their families behind to escape pogroms, systemic discrimination, and dismal futures. They were the fortunate ones who left Eastern Europe before Hitler came to power. Many of their families were not so fortunate. Even while unaware, I absorbed veiled insecurities from my grandparents and their children relayed to us within our newly transplanted and relocated family. When my parents were growing up in Toronto the Good, there were signs on Toronto's waterfront prohibiting Jews and dogs from swimming on the public beaches. Landlords were legally allowed to prohibit Jews from renting living or business space. The University of Toronto, along with others across Canada, imposed strict quotas on Jewish students when they let them in at all. My aunt moved to the States to study nursing, as Toronto nursing schools did not accept Jews. It is important to remember that both Mount Sinai Hospital and Baycrest Center were both built and staffed by the Toronto Jewish community for the Toronto Jewish community. At the time, anti-Semitism was ever present, and Toronto Jews did not have equitable access to healthcare, nor did aspiring Jewish health providers have equitable access to education and employment opportunities. In my home, we enjoyed our multicultural life in Toronto the Good, but even as a child whose parents were also born in Toronto, I intuitively knew that I wasn't truly one of the real Torontonians. As the statistics in this slide demonstrate, it seems I wasn't that misguided. Still, as a native Torontonian, I love this city and I find much to be proud of. I love the multiculturalism of this city and the opportunities offered to be part of a global community right outside my door. Then there are those days with the incidence of blatant anti-Semitism acts increasing, so do my feelings of otherness. Next slide, please. I have witnessed and felt how anti-Semitism moves on a continuum and can blow up with dangerous consequences at any time. In the aftermath of World War II, the Holocaust was a symbol of the importance of, in quotes, lessons learned, and what can happen when both racism and human rights are ignored. It seems that mankind has both a very short collective memory and attention span as well. There was nothing redeeming or justifying the Holocaust, but the strongest motivator for Holocaust survivors to rebuild their lives was to bear witness and ultimately to speak of the unspeakable, to live and to ensure that it happens never again. They have given us many lessons to learn. Just over 30 years ago, I arrived at Baycrest Center and began my new career working with older adults, many of whom were Holocaust survivors. At the time, the Toronto's Holocaust survivor population was beginning to age and were dealing with various age-related challenges. In those early days, there was no particular body of knowledge, as this was the first time in modern history a population of genocide survivors even reached the age of 65, 75, and much higher. We began to recognize this particular client group as unique and requiring knowledge and appropriate approaches to care that had never been considered before. Together with the survivors and their families, we began talking and rethinking many of our standardized approaches to care. Next slide. We started with a simple recognition and acknowledgement. In terms of quality and responsive health care, this definition of who is a Holocaust survivor was expanded beyond the definition designed by the German government for restitution applications. This one is based on a recognition of trauma experience, massive loss, displacement, and extreme threats to life. Working with a significantly large group of Holocaust survivors, we immediately recognized that they and their families were the only true experts in the field. Together, we all embarked on a journey that would inform many levels of elder care, both in the community and the institution. I had no idea how much this work would influence both my professional and my personal life. This photo is one of Margie Levitt and her mom, a Holocaust survivor. Margie is a child of the second generation, well, a grown-up child at this point, has been active across Toronto for decades, providing Holocaust education, as well as advocating for services for survivors, and was an incredible partner in doing the same through the professional world as well. Next slide, please. My presentation this evening was always meant to be about lessons and legacies. But just over a week ago, I had no idea how critical the lessons I have learned from Holocaust survivors and how far they would take me beyond the scope of my work. While the war in the Middle East rages on and world tensions are escalating, we are all trying to adapt to everything changing every day and every hour. I'm not sure when, what, and how it will settle, but we can already see that winning and losing is taking on new meaning. These two photos speak for themselves. They were taken just over a week ago by news correspondents. On the left is an Israeli mother and her children, and on the right, a Palestinian mother and her child. At this point in time, we can only anticipate how our understanding of trauma is going to be challenged in the future. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a look at and discuss a little bit of the history of trauma studies and how it has evolved over the years. The photo here is a picture of my mother and father-in-law who survived the Holocaust in Romania, and after the war managed to leave the country, and the only country allowed for them to exit to was Israel. They're an example of the resilience and capacity and adaptability that so many survivors have demonstrated. Generally speaking, it is about the psychosocial effects and the impact of a traumatic event of an individual or community. Our knowledge base and understanding of trauma is embedded, though, in war history. In recent years, the neurobiological aspects of trauma are also playing a key role in our understanding of what it means and the impact it has. Within the field of psychosocial support, we continue to see trauma within our various practices that moves us well beyond the scope of war, even though war remains the recurring theme in the trauma research literature. In the past 20 years or so, the word trauma has worked its way into everyday English, and at long last, the importance and relevance of trauma-informed practice is being addressed. Next slide, please. The first mention of war trauma was in 1871 by American physician DaCosta, who described, quote, soldiers' irritable heart syndrome, also known as DaCosta syndrome. There's something quite touching about the definition of a soldier's irritable heart, but his description of increased arousal, irritability, and elevated heart rates in soldiers exposed to combat is not so touching. During this period, Freud also chimed in and theorized that war trauma, quote, presents the mind with an increase of stimulus too powerful to be dealt with or worked off in the normal way. Also, in the context of the First World War, the term shell shock was defined by Southard, who described similar symptoms. Moving forward to World War II, Brinker and Spiegel described combat neurosis based on soldiers returning from the battlefront. Immediately after the Holocaust survivors were liberated, there was very little research conducted. While parts of the world were trying to absorb or deny what had actually occurred, others were not even interested. Most of the early research was done by Jewish professionals, and in 1945, Friedman identified Buchenwald syndrome. It was based on medical and psychiatric evaluations that identified similar symptomatology. Expanding this diagnosis soon afterwards, in 1952, the American Association of Physicians recognized gross stress reaction, which was primarily based on the Holocaust survivors and traumatized soldiers post-war. Next slide, please. Out of all of these early forays into our understanding and coming out of Buchenwald syndrome, in 1964, Niederlin defined concentration camp syndrome. After the war, those survivors who were eligible in need of any available restitution or treatment were required to fill out applications, be medically evaluated, examined, and demonstrate either a clear physical or psychiatric need. These demands led to either excluding those individuals who are fending for themselves and trying to rebuild their lives, or those who were not prepared to be further scrutinized, labeled, and singled out. The data we have from that early period is primarily from restitution eligibility applications. Even while lacking the resourceful and resilient aspects of trauma, much was learned about understanding trauma. Similar approaches to missing important aspects of the impact of severe trauma occurred with survivors of the Hiroshima nuclear attacks as well. Still, the research on the recurring themes and common symptoms exhibited by survivors of war, natural disaster, or other extreme traumatic events eventually led to official recognition by the American Psychiatric Association in 1994. This was a clearer and more inclusive definition of trauma and given a new label. Next slide, please. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, sadly in today's world, has become a reference in everyday conversation. This list of symptoms shown here is very generalized, but now that it is in the public domain, it is often overused and often inappropriately. Rather than identifying a hierarchy of trauma, we have learned post-Holocaust that severe trauma must include the implications and ramifications of how it is experienced in general, rather than specific to the actual lived experience. Not all survivors experience trauma or show similar symptomatology. All survivors experience trauma, but in different ways. Also, one has to consider the levels of stability and safety that one experienced during the trauma and what occurred immediately thereafter. More than ever, we can learn from the post-war experience of Holocaust survivors and their families about how to approach reports of traumatic experiences, how to deal with the aftermath, and how to support them. We have learned to appreciate the differences between living with a current disorder or with a traumatic past. Next slide, please. One very important lesson finally being acknowledged is that PTSD is a psychiatric disorder and does not properly take in the human capacity to absorb such massive loss, pain, physical and psychic deprivation, and still maintain the capacity to rebuild lives. Rather than pathologizing an entire population of Holocaust survivors around the world, their individual stories, family histories, experiences, ages, location, and post-war supports all make PCTI, person-centered trauma-informed care, a requisite for post-trauma mental health. The two are not mutually exclusive, but rather than care potentially further traumatizing a survivor, PCTI puts the onus on the care provider to build on individual support, strengths, and capacities. This slide is two of the clients that I had in my Holocaust survivors group, posing with the manual that we published at Baycrest for professionals and families, all kinds of backup support from different professions across the board, and how to support their clients, their patients, and their relatives. Next slide, please. Even while the definitions of trauma evolve, so does the incidence of trauma. This is a challenging list where everyone on the planet is being personally impacted by at least one of these points. As daunting as that is, and as helpless as we as individuals might feel, it is so critical to be aware of it, and in your public and private lives, consider how we can each lessen the impact of severe trauma. This slide shows exploding rockets falling out of the sky last week and a mid-pandemic family portrait. The family is mine. The trauma rockets flying over my head is one that I personally can't imagine, but around the world, we are still coping with the aftermath of a global pandemic where we all experienced varying degrees of intense personal isolation, disrupted lives, lost jobs and homes, fear of an invisible unknown virus, and many sudden unexpected deaths. This family shows us mid-pandemic with a rare special treat, a visit with our grandchildren. Even while we are moving on, we still haven't understood what the long-term human impact of COVID will be. Trauma is far-reaching and its impact has many faces. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the children of Holocaust survivors. This slide is a group of adult children of survivors that I worked with in the early days while they trained me, and how to support them in their mission of supporting their parents. We organized world conferences, we organized educational programs, and these women were an incredible asset to the community. The children of survivors of genocide in general, and the Holocaust in particular, have generated as much and perhaps even more study than their parents. Survivors and their children are often refugees, and like all immigrants, struggle to adapt and integrate into new communities and cultures and establish themselves financially, socially, and emotionally. However, trauma survivors and their children often experienced unique differences in the context of family. For survivors, family life after the Holocaust took on many different meanings, and whatever your concept of normal families did not apply to these decimated young families. Since the young adult survivors of the Holocaust relocated and rebuilt their families post-war, we have learned much about the reality of transgenerational transmission of trauma and how it impacted the children of Holocaust survivors. For their parents, children represented rebuilding and restoring even the presence of family, and justified their survival. Raising their reconstituted and relocated families was often the only rationale for the struggles that they experienced. It took some years until they, as young adults, recognized the varied and differential challenges that they, as children of survivors, faced growing up in a survivor family. The second generation notably tried to live up to their parents' expectations and protect them from any more trauma, even as they absorbed and internalized the trauma in their home. Next slide, please. It's so important when we talk about Holocaust survivors and their families not to focus on any of the pathology, but looking towards the strengths. Within the international population of adult children of Holocaust survivors, there is a high proportion of individuals involved in careers and life choices that have contributed improving the quality of everybody's education, healthcare, community leadership, wherever they may live. The now aging adults of the second generation have demonstrated that attributes listed here did have some positive outcomes beyond the trauma existing in their respective homes. So many survivor families have given new meaning to the label PTSR, post-traumatic stress resilience. Next slide, please. Today, whether it be a personal encounter with climate disasters, wildfires, family and friends impacted by war, pandemic-related long-term challenges, economic shifts, racism, and related to tonight's topic, anti-Semitism, trauma is very much in the air. One only has to turn on the television. The impact is exacerbated by instant access to all forms of media, often without regard to honest and factual content. New technology makes ferreting out the truth, recognizing genuine risk factors, a mighty task. With the ready accessibility to a large audience of disenfranchised users, social media has provided a fertile ground for the growth of anti-Semitism as per tonight's topic, but many other isms as well. Thus, in the relative safety of our own homes, we are exposed to and likely experience vicarious trauma. Much of it is well-founded, some not so much, but all of it is challenging our community's sense of mental health, well-being, and safety. We need to be aware of it and remain kind and supportive in our everyday interactions with each other. We need to consider what triggers impact our own personal experience of vicarious trauma. Next slide, please. What are the triggers of trauma? Years ago, when I started working at Baycrest and the population of Toronto's survivor population was just turning to us, we quickly realized that they had some very unique needs, different from their Jewish peers. We began noting and documenting some common triggers that would cause negative response at best and catastrophic reactions at worst within our survivor client base. An example of a classic trigger would be when a relative stranger in uniform approaches an elderly resident, perhaps with mild cognitive challenges, reminding him it was time to be escorted to the shower. For a concentration camp survivor, particularly one with a failing short-term memory, this could take him right back to the concentration camp and the showers that gassed so many. Unfortunately, we couldn't take these flashbacks away, but the answer was simple: use a bathtub. The bottom line was that we also noted that some residents were also in concentration camps, would welcome a shower and enjoy the sensation of feeling freshly clean. Others had survived medical experiments and body temperature in tubs of boiling water, and the mention of baths promised different traumatic reactions. Triggers really became a standard for individualized care, and together with colleagues working around the world, we accumulated long lists of potential triggers specific firstly to the Holocaust survivors and eventually to other survivors of war. Our awareness of triggers and our commitment to accommodate them in whatever creative way we could became a new model for best practice at the time. We each have our own triggers that evoke a range of intense reactions, and it is helpful to recognize what those are. This slide shows two of mine. On the left is the Tower of Shoes on exhibit in Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum. These shoes belong to Jews murdered in Auschwitz. When I first visited this museum, rather than many other complex visual and educational components, this display is what flattened me and had left an indelible mark on my psyche. Flash forward to last year, and the photo on the right shows a spontaneous community memorial created in Barrie, recognizing the deaths and honoring the members of the Indigenous children murdered at the Kamloops residential school. For me, this juxtaposed pair of pictures is the trigger that causes visceral sensations of pain and loss, both from yesterday and in fear of tomorrow. It is not unhealthy to be aware of your own triggers and then consider how to work with and around them. Next slide, please. Now we are coping with new triggers. Not only does it help to work out your own personal triggers, we need to be aware of how we can support our families and community as they adapt to a new normal where continually changing challenges seem to be the norm. This will require a postmodern flexibility and responsiveness that we need to prepare for as much as we can, even while we are not sure what we are preparing for. These are my grandchildren, and try as I cannot picture what their future will look like. What I have learned and witnessed from our survivors demonstrates that courage and resilience are key components of survival, regardless of what you are facing. Next slide, please. This slide via logos and historic symbols touches on just a very few of the current challenges to the mental health of many Canadians and people around the globe. This grouping barely touches the surface and symbolizes great trauma and great pain, each one resembling markedly different circumstances, each one laden with its own trauma, and each one represents markedly different struggles to survive and be safe. I don't know what the coming weeks and months will bring us, but I do know that we will face challenges. Obviously, by being here, you too are trying to make sense of cascading changes. Mental and physical wellness are critical components to not just surviving, but to thriving, and that is something that we can impact. My thought process and considerations when preparing for this evening has strengthened my commitment to stay involved and use my energy to reworking and reconstructing our expectations on our responses to the myriad challenges. Next slide, please. Something immediate and tangible that is attainable is a commitment to creating safe havens for ourselves, our families, and our communities. Canada is not the icon of stability and inclusivity that I once thought, but our diversity and history of trying to confront our own failures. The promise of a flourishing cultural mosaic gives me hope. Once we admit we have a problem, then we can work on fixing it. Our children and their children, in the face of so much chaos, all deserve our best efforts. We now know about the transmission of trauma. We understand trauma triggers can follow us through life. And we also now know how, in a safe space, resilience can also live alongside trauma. Canadians, regardless of ethnicity, culture, color, race, gender, physical and mental ability, all deserve this. The children of the Middle East, Ukraine, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and the list goes on, also deserve this. I received this photo a few days ago from a friend in Israel. Ruth is the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and shown here are her two adult granddaughters with their children examining the mural in my friend's building's safe room. The mural was painted during the war with Lebanon in 2006, while rockets were flying overhead. Ruth and the same two granddaughters, armed with paint and optimism, spent their time in the shelter that year painting the mural. Next slide, please. As our population of Holocaust survivors is growing smaller, we are entering a period of post-memory Holocaust narratives within a world that is shifting in its understanding of justice, democracy, trauma, and suffering. We are on a new trajectory of racism that is not only influenced by long-standing injustice, but a world that can no longer contain the social, environmental, cultural, economic challenges and burdens. The necessity to teach new generations in a society facing new challenges has inspired new approaches and new methods. In Canada, the Israeli Foundation's Holocaust Survivor Memoir Program has been making groundbreaking progress in publishing survivors' memoirs and supporting their distribution with excellent companion resources for students of all ages and their teachers. The resources continue to grow, reaching out with both relevance and creativity. Another groundbreaking project has been the use of AI and creating virtual opportunities to share an open dialogue with a Holocaust survivor today and many years from now. You can meet my friend Pinchas Gutter, who post-90 is still active as an educator and a Holocaust survivor who continues to work for justice. Pinchas volunteered many hours of his time and emotion and participated in the first avatar presentation of interviewing a Holocaust survivor. He answered hundreds of thousands of questions over several days, and this photograph is a picture of what the avatar looks like, which is Pinchas, and we'll sit there, and the myriad questions that all ages of students will have will be available for them to go up, ask Pinchas, and get suitable answer. It is a total combination of the creativity of the future and the dedication of the present. Next slide, please. Over time, I found myself absorbing some of the trauma that I worked with. When this was my full-time job, I needed to find new ways to personally deal with it. While we had a small and supportive international community of helping professionals, we were all working in uncharted territory. When words failed me, I intuitively turned to visual arts and music. I was the leader of a group of Holocaust survivors that met together weekly for 8 years. As with most groups, we spent a fair bit of time at the beginning getting to know and trusting them, and then struggled to find common ground and the ability to share deep and dark traumas. Over time, we all found great comfort and strength in creative projects in order to sustain ourselves and through all the challenges. At the same time, we found new pleasure and pride in sharing themselves and their experience beyond our meeting room. The results were amazing and made us all proud. Now the work invested in these projects continues to live on, adopting new ways of communication and new generations. This picture shows the group's first large project. It is a massive quilt, 10 feet wide and 5 feet high. Each square a tribute to an individual survivor's chosen content, each one telling a remarkable story, and each one bearing witness to a life lived, a family not forgotten, and a strong dose of hope. We used photo transfers, look-alike photos for people that had none, and lots of grandchild pictures to tell some remarkable stories. It generated great pride and interest when it was created. Now, over 15 years later, the group members have all passed away, but their quilt is still hanging, telling their stories and celebrating their lives. Next slide, please. It is highly unusual to run a group for an extended period of time with the entire membership of frail older adults living and participating for so many years. I continuously looked for alternate ways to maintain engagement, strength, and capacity for both the group members and the leaders. We began our poetry project, where I would tape each meeting, go home and collect statements and thoughts verbatim, and arrange them thematically. At first, my group members were so impressed how the poet captured their thoughts. But once they realized that they were the creators of their work, they harnessed their energy and became poets. In 1995, the first edition of the poems was published and sharing their stark beauty and impact within the larger community. Next slide, please. Our book of poetry gave so many survivors and their families enhanced strength to continue honoring their memories and great comfort knowing that their poems would reach out when they were no longer able to do so. For several years, their book was their pride and joy and became the collective voice of their authors. The poetry seemed to have served their purpose well, and after all our poets had passed on, the book languished quietly on a shelf. Then just a few years ago, I met Dan Rosenberg, a music producer extraordinaire, who read them, saw their potential, and took several home with him and reinvented them. I just want to tell about this photo. Again, moving into the future, this is a picture from this year's High Holidays Tashlich service on Hanlan's Point. And this is the queer community's first celebration of gathering together for the high holidays and represents yet another diverse group within the Jewish community, a young child blowing a shofar. Working with some amazing composers and musicians, Dan Rosenberg created Silent Tears, a collection of original songs that has since traveled around the world, receiving enthusiastic receptions, rave reviews, top ratings on global and world music charts, and several prestigious awards. The broken dreams, the post-war reflections, and the capacity to keep on living of our terrorist survivors group, along with the words of Toronto survivor Molly Applebaum, will be carried forward to a whole new generation and a whole new range of demographics. Obviously, the message resonates. The following is an example of one of the songs entitled The Numbers on My Arms, music composed by Rebecca Volkstein, played by the Payador Tango Ensemble, and sung by Toronto's Aviva Chernik. You have music now, please.
was mir viel im nie sind, dass ich weiß. Und euch so mehr Zeit, wenn sie's heiß. Ich behat im Bett, darf nicht mein Kummer. Hab a Stimme gehad, was a seine. Hat mein Bobbe gehad euch amor. Und die Augen bleiben wie Stuhl. Von der Mammen, die Haar euch die Bräune. Von dem Taten bekommen noch hab ich kurze Fies und a rundigen Guss. Und der mit das lebt in mir auf. Von sein Mames Mischpoche euch der Strich. Die Faschisten haben sie umgebracht. Bin ich ein Leben geblieben und verbleib so Tag und Nacht mit dem Nummer um meine
Thank you. And now a little bit about the third generation. This generation represents the grandchildren of the Holocaust survivors. These are my children, the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Today, most of the children of the majority of Holocaust survivors are now older adults. It is their children, the third generation, that are embracing their legacy with a new perspective as they mature and look to their past. The global estimate is approximately 450,000 grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, a significant number that is defining a new hopefulness and energy within the survivor legacy. Generally, the lives of the third generation have been more normalized than those of their parents. Regardless of countries of origin and individual family personalities, the grandchildren have been more integrated into the normative definition of what is family. A major factor would be experiencing a grandparent-grandchild relationship, which so many of their parents did not. Next slide, please. The legacy. The legacy the grandchildren have access to several decades of study, memorializing, remembering, honoring, and recognizing the experiences of families during and after the Holocaust. They have the interest in learning their familial past and in including it in their future. That is the legacy. When studying the Holocaust and the needs of survivors during those formative years, families and care providers were part of the history as it unfolded. The small remnant of European Jewry that survived found ways to mourn and honor their murdered families, even while so many built new families. So many had the capacity to create loving homes for their children. Then, as they grew older and their families were launched, they shared their memories and their lives with the rest of us, so we could learn in varying degrees, in varying ways, and they managed to triumph over trauma. In the world we live in today, these are critical lessons. There has been so much to learn and to come to terms with as our understanding evolves. We have witnessed an evolution of historical and social approaches to the Holocaust from a variety of disciplines, perspectives, and methodology. We've done this work within a rapidly changing world, and even today, the notions of lessons and legacies and our understanding and coping is changing from one hour to the next. Still, we have learned that people can survive the worst of atrocities. We have learned that it takes courage, compromise, community, and commitment to do so. We have learned about resilience and our capacity to rebuild. We have some insight in what it takes and how to accomplish that. So many people I know are currently experiencing great pain and loss, and so much of what I have learned about resilience, reconciliation, and renewal has come from my years spent with Holocaust survivors. It is their efforts for survivors, it is their efforts to survive yesterday and today's dedicated and creative commitment to passing on the lessons learned that gives me hope for tomorrow. In ending, I wish you all peace and safety in your lives and the strength to not giving up on either. Thank you very much.
I hope people can see me and hear me. Paula, I want to thank you so much for that insightful talk and for what is ultimately a hopeful message. As promised, I'm going to invite Anna Sternis to turn on her camera and share a few words with us.
Thank you, Dean Williams, and thank you, Dr. David, for this wonderful talk. As I was listening to your lecture, I was thinking a number of things. First, how long it took for the society to truly make sense of trauma caused by the Holocaust. I think you mentioned the year of 1994 when the Holocaust survivor definition was finally recognized and kind of was given as a guidance. But I was also thinking how much better lives of Holocaust survivors became because people like you got involved in their care. And it's not just the project of passion of yourself and your talent and your insight, but it's also institutional and societal understanding that it's really important to support Holocaust survivors to make sure that their lives are better, fuller, their children, their grandchildren. And conversely, society cared eventually about all that. And I have to say, thinking about what you've said about how people deal with trauma, and you bring it up as well in your talk, how relevant your work is to what's going on today. I direct Center for Jewish Studies here at the University of Toronto, and after October 7th, just 12 days ago, our center opened doors to Jewish and non-Jewish students, faculty members, and staff, people who were devastated of what happened in Israel. A lot of our community, as you may know, lost their family members in the terrorist attack. One student's grandma was kidnapped. Another faculty lost her cousin. My son's friend from camp was kidnapped. A lot of students have their friends who were drafted in the army right away. Some of them were killed already or wounded. And the problem was that the people carried so much pain and there was no place for them to go. And one of the things that I think that society was learning from dealing with Holocaust survivors is how important it is to develop empathy. And right after the Holocaust, the first kind of testimonies, the first memoirs, the first stories that emerged from survivors were talking about the pain of the world was silent. Elie Wiesel, when he wrote his first memoir about what happened to him, called it in Yiddish, the world was silent. It's only later it became the night. So that pain of suddenly inability to find compassion or ability to cry with others, non-Jews specifically, was one of the pain that people reported and something that they really could not understand. What I'm hoping is that your work will become central in how we make sense of, well, you ended by saying, like, we have to learn from this, we have to apply some of the methods that we developed to make our society better. I truly hope that we are going to learn from this and learn some things about compassion and empathy and understanding each other. And by the way, when we welcome people to Cry in the Center, it was not just Jewish students who were there, also people who worried about their families in Gaza, a lot of students of Palestinian descent, people who wanted to cry about their loss somewhere where they would be understood. And I will finish my remarks by saying that and Paula David mentioned genocide in her lecture and the definitions of genocide. I want to add to that our colleague, Professor Doris Bergen, a specialist and Holocaust historian, has written in her book on war and genocide that genocides always happen step by step. It's if humans understand that, well, genocide is mass murders, and that slide was very helpful. But what's missing often from our understanding of genocide, it doesn't happen all at once. And it takes small steps. Society gets used to certain things, to certain individuals or communities being discriminated, ignored, or otherwise harassed. So I hope that what we're taking from your study, from your work, is that one has tools, has means to think about how we study, create, and hopefully live in a better society where people are aware of what trauma does to individuals and to generations. So thank you so much for the opportunity to listen to this talk, Dr. David, and for the opportunity to give those remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sternis. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Lin Feng to come on screen.
Thank you, Dean Williams. It's a pleasure to moderate the question and answer. And I want to, first of all, thank you, Paula, for this insightful and important topic, and also for this very timely speech. I want to really thank you for sharing your deep knowledge, insights, and experience on this topic. And we're very grateful to be able to learn from your years of work with Holocaust survivors and other survivors of wars, genocide, and extreme trauma using a trauma-informed approach. Certainly, it's not an easy topic to have, but it's such an important topic to have. We also really appreciate the professional and personal insight you have provided through this talk. Before we turn to the question and answer, I do want to also thank Anna for sharing her reflections on your lecture. And I'm wondering, Paula, if you can spend some time responding to Anna's reflections.
I actually found what Anna said extremely heartening, and that there are safe spaces across the campus open to any students of any nationality or country of origin, and the fact that they would come together to discuss it and in the same space, I find extremely reassuring. In terms of genocide, I agree, small steps, and nobody really remembers how far the distance you can go taking very small steps. So it's a very timely reminder when we are looking at global incidents right now around the world. The focus tonight, anti-Semitism and then the goings on in Canada and the Middle East is one thing, but there is the potential, as we have seen post-Holocaust, for small steps not to be noticed until we're there in the midst of some big crisis. So I very much appreciated that reminder put into the context of what I was talking about.
Thank you, Paula. Now I will be turning to the questions that's coming from our audience. We already have some questions, and I'll also encourage people, everyone in your audience, feel free to use the Q&A button on the bottom of your manual and to just type as your questions. We'll try to address them as much as we can. So Paula, one of our questions are from the audience is related to the impact of Holocaust, and in this case, the question states, I have been trying to understand the impact of Holocaust on my family. I have found it very difficult for people to identify and to discuss that time period. I recognize the need to go slow and to create safety. I am wondering, however, if you have any tips for engaging this type of conversations.
Okay, I'm not quite clear if this question is coming from somebody within a Holocaust survivor family or wanting to reach out to people from a Holocaust survivor family.
The question seems to suggest that it's understanding the impact of Holocaust on their own family. So it says on my family.
Okay. It's complicated because every family is uniquely different. Every survivor, even if they were in the same place under the same conditions during the Holocaust, would have a uniquely different experience. Family dynamics are different in the context of every family. Having said that, there is a commonality of family history within any survivor family, and the best way to explore those similarities and learn from each other is by being very frank and reaching out. There is a Holocaust support group that I am aware of in the city, and I believe there are other informal ones that I'm not aware of, but I believe you'll find some reference to that on the Baycrest website. And that would be meeting people from survivor families that you may not know, and that there also are several community centers and synagogues that do address the issues of the second generation and how it's impacted their life.
Thank you, Paula. It's also great to know that there's a range of resources. I think some of our other questions will get into that as well. We also have a question about how do you think, Paula, from your perspective, and I know you were alumni here, you taught here, you've been still very engaged in both education and research in various fronts. We were wondering, how do you think from your perspective, how can the school social work to better prepare our students to address anti-Semitism?
That's a hard question. I still go back to the original statement of you have to name it, you have to recognize it, and then deal with it. In my personal experience over the last several years, in our efforts to be inclusive of an ever-changing pattern of immigration and refugees arriving from around the globe from different places, and the good people amongst us in the professions and in the communities want to reach out and support these people, often forgetting other groups that are here and still suffering. So it's a very tall order to be able to acknowledge all of them, but it's something that bears ongoing discussion and recognition that because one group, and I would say anti-Semitism and our attitude toward our indigenous populations are ones that are historically well entrenched in this country, and it just takes some extra effort to keep those on the table and deal with them as well. And that is not to take anything away from any other group that needs help and support.
Thank you for that. I think just really to be very cognizant of our efforts and also really also, I think, find that share commonalities and find strengths together. I will be, and we have another question here. The question is, can you also talk about ways in which you have helped Holocaust survivors cope, not just with the trauma, but also having lived through this horrible genocide, but the painful gaslighting of Holocaust denial, both during and after World War II?
Immediately afterwards, I believe in general, the survivor community, having just experienced what they did, didn't have very high expectations of anybody being particularly supportive or wanting to rescue them. I think there was a group assumption that they were on their own. In their countries where they relocated, they formed groups and communities amongst themselves, giving mutual support wherever they could, recognizing that a lot of them didn't have a lot to give. So I'm not sure that they expected much, and in truth, they didn't get that much. But later, as they were getting on their feet and feeling a part of their new homes and their new countries and understanding the culture, they did manage remarkably to become part of those communities. And that doesn't take away from this fact that people, Jewish people already here in the communities, had acclimatized and didn't experience anti-Semitism. So really they were joining a new social structure, a new construct in a new country. And because of the resilience and their need to adapt, they did.
Thank you, and I think you really speak to also the resilience in people, and in this case. So thank you for that. And I think that also the importance of those the community support that emerge from that space. Our next question are related to the resources. Are there you actually named a few resources already? I think Bakewest and some synagogues you may mention. I think there's other places you're talking about. So we're wondering, are there places to find resources to supporting practitioners working with adult children of survivors and their now adult children and teen grandchildren? I think this is specifically important when we're talking about the intergenerational trauma. And this person asks, I'm seeing differences among the generations to coping and making sense of the current crisis. Are there resources to support families' trauma-informed way to attend to the family or respective generation, the individuals in different generations?
There are no specific professional alliances and resources that I'm aware of within the city. And it would be a matter of networking and phoning the central places, looking for referrals, particularly regarding which generation you're talking about and which type of trauma. Sadly, there is not a significant community of Holocaust survivors left anymore. And most of the ones that we still have were children survivors, which had a different experience than the adult survivors, the adults at the end of the war who survived. So we are in that chapter now, and child survivors, because they were children, were received differently and had different challenges to face than young adult survivors. That's the first difference. But the Jewish Federation in Toronto does have an information base and is aware of a lot of resources. Education is a very strong arm of this community and comes out again from the new Holocaust Museum, as well as the various offices within the Central Federation building. I know there are lots of community events, resources, and one-off educational events for survivor families, but I am sure that if the interest was generated, there could be more. With heads up that within the faculty, there is a real need for training workers who have an interest and dedicated to these unique aspects of trauma and working with those families.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you for naming those resources. And I think I fully agree with you. And we're talking about trauma-informed approach a lot these days. But like you said, trauma is far-reaching. It also manifested in very different ways. And people need to really, I think, develop their expertise and understand different forms of trauma and how they affect people and generations. Great. Right, I'll be turning to the next question. The question says, you spoke about post-traumatic stress resilience and the idea of not focusing on pathologies, but look towards strengths. Could you share a bit more on this and what that will look like to take on this approach for both social workers and others?
I think in general, social work does work from a strengths perspective. So we are looking even within a traumatic, very traumatic impact that is defined as a post-traumatic stress disorder. It still behooves us to look at what strengths are there so we can begin work to healing and at the very least coping better with the challenges an individual faces. I have often been in a multi-professional working situation so pleased that my training was a social work perspective because it let us cross all the various boundaries of other professions and overlap, looking at their strengths, learning from them, and then coming back to the notion of a success in the field, a success in our work, and that we can measure is when a client doesn't really need our support anymore, but finds that strength from within. So I am not denying a psychiatric disorder of post-traumatic stress, but at the same time, because it's not quite the same as a broken bone on an X-ray and what you would do next for that, it has to be an individualized approach to care and support.
Thank you for that. And I know you talked about you talked about your upbringing here in Toronto and your journey to your professional journey to some extent. I am curious about if you're looking at the time you have here at the Faculty Montage Faculty of Social Work and the training education you received, was there any particular time that inspired you to work closely with Holocaust survivors and other survivors of trauma?
Not while I was in the faculty. My master's degree was a long time ago, and I don't believe we heard much about trauma per se. And as a matter of fact, we just had a mini class reunion of several of us showing up to celebrate our 50th year of entering the faculty. Times have changed, obviously, and thankfully. When I got to Baycrest and I realized how much I didn't know and how much we were not recognizing and responding to, I was very clear for a long time that none of us, even those that had training in trauma work, could have prepared ourselves for the scope of the trauma stories that we were hearing, period. We were the first round of healthcare providers to be actually getting these stories from many people because as far as the chapter in the survivor's life story, it was their time to start telling them. So we had to learn as we went along. That has changed dramatically since those early days. And now we have a much better informed body of healthcare providers and people who are knowledgeable and know how to proceed and go forward. Ours was by trial and error. Oh, and then I have to also say that when I came back to the faculty, because I wanted to learn how and what to do with what I was learning at Baycrest, so I came back to do a doctorate, and it was an incredible experience for me because what I was focused on the work I had been doing and was doing, and learned how to do research properly and how to pull together what we knew and pull it in a way that it could be moved forward and be of use.
Thank you for that, and it's encouraging to hear that despite that we've been always in this in times of crisis and troubles, but I think social work continue to. I think we have made progress, and although there's a lot more to be done and do, but we I'm glad to hear that there are things that we make that change over time. Now I'm turning to the audience questions. One question is about the question is about if anyone is tracking Holocaust survivors, and when will we know when the last survivor has passed away?
Nobody is tracking Holocaust survivors other than we hear from personal or institutional experience, and nobody will ever know because so many survivors are still not feeling safe enough to self-identify as survivors. There are many families that don't even know their parents' or grandparents' war history because they are still not comfortable discussing it. So there is much gray in the equation of our understanding and knowledge base, and I don't think that will change.
No, I think, yeah, it's the tremendous impact of trauma, and I think that totally makes sense. Thank you. Now this is a question, also a question from our audience. Just make sure I pull it up here. So the audience, the question is, well, I love the creative approaches you use to help preserve the memories of our older adults. As we move into a digital age, these works of art will also hold significance in how we celebrate, cherish, and connect with each other. Are there new ways of capturing these memories that you're looking forward to or recommend we explore to continue this?
I'm sure there are infinite numbers of new ways. Most recently, I was involved in the music in putting the poetry. I didn't do it, but putting the poetry to music, something I never would have imagined or conceived of on my own, nor could I ever have imagined the impact that it had, particularly for the women, other than Molly Applebaum, that wrote poetry and whose words they were used. None of them are alive any longer, and in their wildest dreams, they could not have imagined this digital phenomenon that has been happening with their music. And for that matter, nor could I. So we are going into a period of post-memory and sharing and looking at new ways to create, interpret, and put out a bigger message. One beautiful thing that happened with the CD is I ran my group in English because I do not speak Yiddish, the common language of most of them. I always felt a little badly about that because it forced people to have to think through personal translation while they were discussing such deep and dark thoughts. However, the end result in English was a syntax that I never, ever could have put together myself. You had to be using English as your fourth or fifth language to arrange words that way. When Dan Rosenberg phoned to tell me they were taping a video and he would send it to me once he had it, I was this was during the lockdown. I'm sitting at home all by myself and turned it on. And there was the video that you saw today in Aviva Chernik's magnificent voice singing in Yiddish. So unbeknownst to me, Dan had them translated into Yiddish, putting them back into the mother tongue that they probably should have been in the first place. And it's just an example of, we don't know how a creative effort will unfold. We don't know where it's going to go and who it's going to touch. For me, it was a personal joy. And I'm still amazed at how it goes around the world to other countries who don't speak Yiddish or English, and they are totally taken by the CD. So it's a journey.
Thank you. I know you were just talking about the group is also actually performing in Brazil now. And I can see the power of art in this case, transcending knowledge and transcending memory, and I guess preserving, transcending, and celebrating lives in different forms. So thank you. And it's just so powerful. It's 8:30. I got the signal that I can no longer ask any further questions. So we need to, we need to turn to, is the CD available, by the way, Paula?
It's on Amazon, I believe, and it's called Silent Tears.
Silent Tears. All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn the platform back to Dean Williams and to take us to a closing remark.
I'll be brief. I just want to thank you so much for this amazing experience, Paula. I know that it's going to stay with me, and I imagine it's going to stay with the people who are here tonight as well. So thank you so much for this, and thank you for doing it at a time when I think we really needed it. I also want to thank Dr. Anna Sternis for her remarks, and Dr. Lin Fang for managing the Q&A so well. I can see that we didn't get to all the questions, and I really do hope that this is a conversation that we'll continue to have. I also appreciate the remarks that were made about what we're doing in social work and some of the ground that we have traveled in terms of being able to talk about and being more versed in issues of trauma, but still so much work to do, and specifically work to do around anti-Semitism as part of our efforts in social justice and in cultural competence. And I look forward to seeing that work unfold in my faculty and in other schools of social work around the world. So thank you. And to everyone, good night, and thank you so much for being part of this great experience.